or brand.
It's like Tina Fey says, if you're feeling good about yourself, just go online.
Headlines are everywhere, and the question keeps coming back. What does this level of attention really do to someone's image, reputation, and control? Because as Tina Fey once joked, if you ever feel confident, just go online for a few minutes, and suddenly everything changes. And that line perfectly captures the environment surrounding Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni, and Colleen Hoover. Because this is not just a simple disagreement. This is a layered situation involving influence, perception, timing, alliances, and power. And the deeper you go, the more complicated it becomes on the surface. Everything looked like a normal film production, a best-selling book, adaptation, a strong cast, a supportive studio, and a fan base ready to embrace the project, but behind the scenes things were already shifting in ways that would later explode into public discussion. Blake positioned herself as someone who had full support and maintained in legal settings that she had no role in any conflict, and that people distancing themselves from Justin Baldoni were acting on their own. But when you analyze the sequence of events, patterns begin to form, patterns that suggest coordination rather than coincidence, especially during post-production, which is where control over a film is truly decided, because editing is not just technical, it is storytelling. It determines tone, pacing, emotion, and ultimately the message. And Blake needed that control in order to secure her version of the film, and to do that, she needed credibility, backing, and influence. And the most effective way to achieve that was through the original author, Colleen Hoover, who held both creative authority and fan trust. So Blake gave her extensive access to the editing process, something that is not commonly done at that level, allowing her to review scenes, suggest changes, and provide detailed notes directly to decision makers. This move strengthened Blake's position, but it also shifted the balance of influence within the project, because the film had largely been shaped by Justin Baldoni during filming, and now the direction of the final product was being challenged in a significant way. However, what seemed like a smart strategy introduced new complications, because once Colleen became deeply involved, her role evolved from observer to participant, and that change affected her relationships with both sides. According to later accounts, she admitted that she unfollowed Justin Baldoni at Blake's request, which immediately raises questions about how independent these actions really were. Because when one person takes a step, it can be personal, but when multiple people take similar steps at the same time, it begins to look coordinated, and this idea is reinforced by reports that others, including Jenny Slate, also distanced themselves from Justin after interacting with Blake, creating a ripple effect that altered the social structure around the project. And these social shifts matter because in high-level productions, relationships are just as important as creative decisions. Alliances determine influence, and influence determines outcomes. And what makes this situation even more complex is the way narratives were communicated privately, because messages suggest that Blake shared specific claims about Justin with Taylor Swift, portraying him as someone attempting to manipulate the project to secure control over the final version. And whether these claims were accurate or exaggerated, the important point is how consistently they were communicated, because repetition builds belief, and belief shapes perception, and once perception is influenced, it becomes very difficult to reverse. At the same time, online speculation added another layer of confusion, because rumors about personal beliefs and connections began spreading among fan communities. And while these rumors did not have clear verified origins, they contributed to the overall tension and created additional distance between individuals involved. And this is where the situation transitions from a creative disagreement into a full-scale power struggle, because now it is not just about the film, it is about control, reputation, and narrative, and multiple parties, including studios, producers, and executives, were aware that something significant was happening behind closed doors. Colleen Hoover found herself in a particularly difficult position because she was connected to both sides, but her increasing involvement in the editing process and her growing alignment with Blake appeared to have influenced how she interpreted the situation and who she ultimately supported. And this shift had a direct impact on how events unfolded, because Blake was not only building support from the author, she also needed support from the cast. However, her limited presence during filming meant she did not have strong relationships with many of them, and this is where Colleen again became a key figure, helping to introduce Blake to other cast members and gradually influencing group dynamics. And once group dynamics begin to shift, the entire environment changes because people start aligning based on trust, communication, and perceived truth. One of the most important turning points came during a major fan event where Justin Baldoni was originally expected to participate but ultimately did not attend. And instead Blake's version of the film was presented, which raised serious questions about whether this outcome was coincidental or the result of strategic decisions designed to control the narrative and shape the first impression of the project. Because first impressions are powerful, especially in entertainment. They influence reviews, audience expectations, and media coverage. And by controlling that moment, you can influence everything that follows behind the scenes. Communication reportedly intensified with stronger language, clearer divisions, and more defined alliances. What started as a disagreement over creative direction evolved into something personal, emotional, and increasingly public. And this is where the involvement of Ryan Reynolds becomes particularly important because messages attributed to him show strong support for Blake and Colleen, while also criticizing Justin and reinforcing a specific narrative. And this matters because influence is not just about actions. It is about messaging tone and consistency. And when influential figures support a perspective, it amplifies that perspective and makes it more credible in the eyes of others. And as the film approached release, the dynamic shifted once again. Because once a project is released into the public space, control moves away from individuals and toward the audience and the market. And at that point, social media becomes the dominant force, because it allows millions of people to share opinions instantly and independently. And this is where control becomes almost impossible, because public reaction cannot be scripted, managed, or fully predicted. Some attempted to explain negative reactions as coordinated campaigns or artificial interference, but many observers believe the response was organic, coming directly from fans, particularly those who had strong emotional connections to the original book and high expectations for the adaptation. And when expectations are not met, reactions can be intense, widespread, and difficult to contain. And this highlights a key reality of modern entertainment. Success is no longer determined solely by studios or creators. It is co-created by the audience and their perception. And perception is influenced by a combination of storytelling, marketing, social media, and behind-the-scenes narratives. And in this case, all of those elements were interacting at the same time, creating a situation that is extremely complex to analyze because every action triggered a reaction, and every reaction influenced the next step, creating a chain of events that shape the final outcome. And what makes this story so compelling is that it demonstrates how influence works at multiple levels: creative, social, professional, and public, and how those levels interact to produce results that no single person fully controls. And this is why understanding the timeline is so important, because it allows us to see how each decision contributed to the overall narrative and how small moments can lead to major consequences over time. And as more information continues to emerge, it becomes clear that what we are seeing is only part of a much larger story, because situations like this are rarely simple. They are the result of multiple motivations, goals, and pressures, interacting in a high-stakes environment where reputation and success are closely connected. And every decision carries long-term implications, not just for the project, but for everyone involved. And this is why the conversation continues to grow, because people are not just interested in what happened, they are interested in why it happened, and what it reveals about the industry, about influence, and about the way stories are shaped and shared in a world where information moves faster than ever and opinions are formed in seconds. And as we continue to follow this situation and analyze new developments, one thing becomes increasingly clear. This is not the end. There are still many layers to uncover, many perspectives to consider, and many questions to answer. And as those answers begin to surface, they will likely add even more complexity to an already intricate narrative. And that is exactly why this story continues to capture attention, because it is not just about one film or one conflict. It is about how power is exercised, how narratives are built, and how perception is shaped in a world where everyone is watching and everyone has a voice. And as long as those elements remain active, the conversation will continue to evolve. bringing new insights, new debates, and new perspectives with it. So the real question is not just what happened, but how much of what we believe is actually complete, and how much is shaped by the viewpoints and intentions of those involved. Because in situations like this, the line between fact and interpretation becomes increasingly blurred, and understanding that is key to making sense of everything we have seen so far, and everything that is still to come. And that is why you need to stay tuned, because the next part of this story could completely change how this entire situation is understood. And once more details come out, the narrative may shift again, revealing new angles, new connections, and new truths that add even more depth to an already complex situation. And in a world driven by attention, influence, and storytelling, this is exactly the kind of story that continues to grow long after it first begins.